I've been over at Miss Cindy's picking mulberries. Now the best way to pick mulberries is to spread out a sheet or a tarp or something and shake the tree, shake the limbs and let the ripe ones fall on that. That makes it so much easier and so much cleaner when you get the berries. I forgot my sheet. Miss Cindy wasn't at home, and then I didn't want to prowl through her stuff trying to look for something that I might be able to use. Mulberries are real juicy, so anything I used of hers, it might ruin it, so I didn't do that. So I ended up just picking them out of the trees, shaking the tree and picking them off the ground. But the best way to do it, if you're ever going to pick mulberries, is definitely to spread something out and shake them down on it. But I was too lazy to drive home, so I didn't do that. Growing up, I really didn't know much about mulberries. I knew, you know, there's the little rhyme or song about skipping or dancing around the mulberry bush, but that's about it. That's all I knew. And I didn't really know of any in my area that grew here. They do grow in North Carolina, but I just didn't have any experience with them. And I'd often wondered about them as I got older, and I heard people talking about making jelly and things like that out of them. And then I found out, I think, that there was one at the folk school, and I was really interested in that one, but of course that's at the folk school, and it seems like the times that I would be teaching there, it wouldn't be ripe. So anyway, it's kind of like a mystery about it. Well, Miss Cindy moved here about 4 or 5 years ago, and she moved into this little house that I'd known my whole life. It was right beside the school I went to elementary school at. So we didn't have kindergarten in those days, but from Head Start to 8th grade, that's where I was every day, by that little house. Well, once she moved in, we realized one of the large, big trees in her yard was a mulberry tree. So since then, I've had access to mulberries, and it's been wonderful. I really enjoy them. So I make mulberry jelly. I've made mulberry juice before. It's very similar, or it reminds me of a blackberry, but it doesn't have that wonderful, blackberry's my favorite jelly. It doesn't have that wonderful blackberry flavor, but that's just in my mind, that's the closest thing. Now, there may be another fruit that you're more familiar with that mulberries more like, but for me, that's what it puts me in the mind of, is blackberries. But once Miss Cindy moved in and I began to be able to use them, and I told Pap about them, it jogged his memory about one, a mulberry tree from his childhood. So way up the creek from where we live, there's a place that's always been referred to as the pear trees my whole life growing up. There's been no pear trees there in my lifetime, but when Pap was a boy, he could remember it was an old home site, is what it was, old home place, and there were pear trees. There was apple trees, there was a mulberry tree, and there was some other fruit things that fruited there, but nobody that lived there. And Pap could remember way back when there was a few structures still left standing. One of the sweet story he remembered about being up in there hunting or doing whatever he was doing, if he'd been to see somebody and it come a storm and he tried to get out of the storm and he sheltered in there, him and I think it was Elsie Chastain. Another story, he was just in there prowling around in like one of the outbuildings, and he was in the top crib like of a barn, or not really a barn, he said more like a corn crib or something, but it had a little top area and he was in it. And right when he was just fooling around in there and he reached along the edge of the roof line there just to get a holt, as he would say, to move around, he just happened to lay his hands right on a nickel. Well, when as a young boy with no money and no prospects of money, finding a nickel was really something, so he remembered that about that place. I've often wondered, it's a beautiful place with just such a good feeling about it, and I've often wondered about the people who live there. You think about planting mulberry trees. Well, maybe they didn't plant it. Maybe it was natively there, but there's no other ones in that area. But apple trees and pear trees, those kind of things, you're thinking for the long haul. You're not thinking about planting them and then leaving. So, but even in Pap's lifetime, his family didn't know what happened to the people that lived there. And anyway, but the mulberry, what it reminded Pap of is when he was a boy and that those things still fruited, his grandmother and his mother would often go up there and harvest the fruit so they could put it up for their family, because there was nobody else harvesting it. Those people was gone. And he said when he was coming through there, he would go help them do that, usually every year about the time they'd keep a check on it, and then they would know when something was ripe. But if he was just coming by there, maybe he'd been hunting or out with his friends fooling around, he would turn his shirt into like a sack or a poke, tie it together, and he'd bring home that much to his mother and his grandmother so that maybe they could make a cobbler or they could make a pie or do whatever. But his memory about the mulberry was that one day him and a bunch of his buddies was fooling around up there playing in the woods. Maybe they were hunting, I'm not sure what they were doing. But it was him and Harold Kearney and a few of the Chris boys, he said. and they realized the mulberries were ripe, so they climbed up in the tree, all of them, and they just started eating, and they were so good. They just thought they were the best things ever, and they were hungry, and they'd been out playing. But Pap said I really liked them until I happened to look at one, and then I noticed it had little mites on it, and he said, and then that turned his stomach, and he couldn't eat any more of them. It made him sick thinking about it. But the rest of the boys, he said, just kept eating the mulberries. So I'm going to make jelly with the mulberries that I picked at Miss Cindy's this morning. I've already looked them and got them rinsed off, and now I'm ready to make the jelly. I'll put the link to the recipe down below in the description where I have it on the Blind Pig and the Acorn. But you need 3 to 4 quarts of mulberries. I've got 4 quarts right here. For each quart, you're going to use 1/4 of a cup of water to cook them in. I'm going to use 3 tablespoons of lemon juice, 1 box of pectin, and 5 cups of sugar. You can probably, if you wanted to, you could get the low sugar pectin, and you could use less sugar than that if you'd like to do it that way. And since I make jelly instead of jam, the mulberries have they have seeds, kind of like, think of raspberries and blackberries, and jam's great for a lot of people, but for whatever reason, I'd rather have jelly, so I make jelly. So the mulberries have this little stem. The very first time I ever made mulberry jelly, I tried to pull that out. I soon realized that's too complicated. So what I do is I use my ricer. Miss Cindy got me this years ago. I use it for so many things in canning and putting up stuff, from applesauce to tomatoes to blackberry jelly or mulberry jelly. So I just leave that little stem on there as I cook it, and then I run it through this to get the juice out. So right now the first step is to cook the mulberries to get the juice out of them. Okay, I have the mulberries in the water cooking just over medium-high heat. We're going to let them cook for about 10 minutes, but every once in a while they're cooking, you can use a potato masher or a spoon or something like that, and just kind of give them a good mash. Try to get all that good mulberry juice to release, and kind of stir them around. Okay, our mulberries have cooked for about 10 minutes, and now we're going to pour them in the ricer. I like to get every little bit of juice, so I'm going to run just a tiny bit of water just to get that little bit on the sides. And this is the dowel or the rod or whatever you call it that comes with the ricer, so it's just as simple as turning it around in there. Once I do this, since I don't like the seeds in mine, once I get you can kind of push it down. You can see the juice coming out the bottom. But once I do this, then I'll still run it through one more time through a really fine sieve or colander, so that I can make sure that I get all the seeds out. This is the same way I do blackberry jelly as well. Hopefully there'll be a lot of blackberries this year. Last year it was like I had to scrape and save and get a few here and a few there. But I have loads of berries right now, blackberries, but we'll see if they actually ripen and get to their full good stage. You could also use a food mill for this, or anything. I'm sure you could use, old-timey people would just use put it all in a thing of cheesecloth and let it drip and let all the juice drip out. I'm not patient enough to do that, but you could certainly do that. Or you could use a food mill. Granny always used a food mill. I just like this ricer. I don't know, it just works for me. But there's a lot of different alternatives out there. Now I'm going to pour the juice through the sieve to get the rest of the seeds out. And again, I'll get a little bit of water. Ooh, not too much. And make sure I get it all. So you can see, even with that, how many seeds still come through. Of course, if you like jam, you could just leave the whole berry. You would need to remove the stem, but I prefer jelly. So I ended up with about 2 cups of juice, of mulberry juice. Of course, you've seen I added a little bit of water, so if you don't end up with that, You really don't need to think about how much juice. If you get 3 to 4 quarts of the mulberries, you'll be fine when you make it. But if you wanted to add a little bit of water like I did, I was actually doing it to make sure I got all that goodness, but you could certainly add a little to jelly recipes. I'm going to put it back through the sieve one more time just to get a few more seeds. You could also, and I've done that a lot, is you could line your colander or your sieve with cheesecloth, and that will make sure to get them probably the first time. But just a little bit more. But you can see that got most all of them that time. So now we're ready to make the jelly. Okay, I've got the mulberry juice here on the stove, and I'm going to put in my pectin and also my lemon juice. And I've got it on like medium-high heat, and then we're just going to stir that in. We're going to wait for this mixture to come to a rolling boil, and then we'll add the sugar. Jelly is one of the easiest things to make if you've never, or to can. If you've never canned, jelly's a wonderful place to start because it goes pretty quick and it's pretty simple. Over to the side, you can see I've got my jars heating in water. There's various ways to do that. My father-in-law, Papa Tony, he likes to put his in the oven. People put theirs in the dishwasher and get them hot like that. But that's just how I grew up, was doing it on the stove in a pot of water. So that's just how I do it. But there's various different ways to do that. And if you are interested in canning, my best advice for you is to get a ball canning book and follow the directions and learn that way. Learn what's safe and what's not. After you've canned for a long time, you feel more comfortable. Like I grew up canning with Granny, and then I've been canning for 30 years. So I feel safe doing the things I do. But if I was just starting out and I had absolutely no experience, that's my advice, is I would get a ball canning book. I would also look around in your community or your family and ask if someone, hey, next time you're canning, putting up green beans or making blackberry jelly or something, can I come help so that I can gain the experience? It's not that difficult. Everyone can do it. It's just that you just need to be safe while you're doing it. But it's totally possible for anyone to do, to put up their own food. It's really a rewarding thing. There's nothing better, even down to a jar of jelly, which is really simple, but you know, to have it on your shelf and know that if you're going to make sandwiches or biscuits and jelly or however you're going to eat it, that there it is and you made it. It's really a rewarding feeling. Okay, now we've come to a full rolling boil, so we're going to add the sugar, and you add it all at once. Stir it in. The next part is that you're going to let it come back to a full rolling boil, and when it does, you're going to boil it 1 minute, and then you're done. You're ready to put it in your hot jars. So we've come back to a full rolling boil, and we're going to let it boil 1 minute, and then we'll be able to put it in the jars. Okay, we can turn the heat off and just kind of scoot it to the side. We're ready to start putting it in the jars. Left some water in that one. As far as how your setup is when you're canning, you just have to kind of figure out what works best for you. This is how I like to do it, but it may not necessarily be how you like to do it. Granny does her stuff different than I do mine. But I usually fill one jar up and then move my little colander, or what do you call that? Whatever you call it. My little thing over. whatever size jar you use is just totally up to you. I've always used small jars, jelly jars, just because I guess Granny did. I don't know, somehow in my head I think that it stays fresher longer because I can open up a jar at a time. But you can definitely, I had a friend who heard the way she looked at it was like, well, why would you do that when you could just put jelly in quart jars, you know, and it would be done faster. So whatever your personal preference is on that one. A lot of, or all canning books will tell you that you should wipe off the top of the rim with a paper towel or a wet cloth. I don't do that always. I should probably, but I don't. And I probably would if I had a lot of spoilage, but I don't have any. Now that I've said that, all this will probably spoil on it. Maybe not. Anyway, but you definitely should probably, especially if you drop a big glob of butter or applesauce or whatever it is that you're canning on there. So I think the rest of it will fit in this little bitty jar. I like these little jars just for that very purpose. I want to get every bit of the goodness. A lot of times, if I don't have enough jelly left to go in a jar to seal, I'll just put it in a little bowl and put it in the refrigerator, and we'll eat it first before we open a jar. And as these jars seal, if you ever have trouble with a jar sealing, like I would wait till the following day and check, and then if it didn't seal, don't throw it away or do anything. Just put it in your refrigerator and eat it first, and it'll be just fine. Recently, I had someone on the channel, a commenter, ask, how would you know if it didn't seal? Well, this little lid, if you push it up and down, it has a give in it. That means it didn't seal. It should just be like the top of a can, like a can of tomatoes or pears or whatever you get from the store that has a smooth lid. It should just be hard. It should just be like that. But if there's a give in it, then that means that it did not seal. But again, I would wait at least 24 hours to make sure whether or not it's going to seal. Sometimes it takes longer than others. You can tell when they start sealing because you hear a pop, pop, pop. That's a beautiful sound. So here's the finished jelly. Isn't it a beautiful color? It'll begin to firm up as it cools, and it'll turn into actual jelly. That gel process will happen and it'll firm up. It's really hot still right now. But isn't it a wonderful thing? I went over to Miss Cindy's this morning and picked the mulberries for free, and then come home and made jelly for my family. It's just so rewarding to put up food for yourself and for your family. I hope you'll leave a comment and tell me about mulberries in your life. Have you eaten the jelly? Did you have a tree that you used to like to snack on, like when Pap was a boy? Or anything, what you think about mulberries, or maybe you were like me and you never really tasted them until you were grown. But mostly, I just hope you'll drop back by often and help me celebrate Appalachia.